it's working okay. The date is February 20th, 1996, and Sheila Dexter Carmen Currier is going to continue talking about her life. We've done one tape already. I'm Lee Currier, her daughter. A few years ago, and we've sort of put it on hold, so I've decided that we need to get back to it. And that's the end of my introduction. So, over to you, Sheila! You just have, here's the microphone here. This little thing right here is the microphone.
Can I turn it off now?
You can turn it off, yeah. You can turn it off by just pressing stop right here. Rather than asking Mom questions, Don, her brother Don, Donald Russell Carmen, died on the 24th, I think, of January, in there somewhere. And we were, Mom and his daughter Suzanne and I were all present at his death. And so that's very much with us. And Mom's would like to talk about Don. So will you start with your earliest memory of him and then sort of do it chronologically like that? Or just whatever comes into your head, I suppose. It doesn't really matter that much.
Actually, what I'm thinking of is because of being present at his death and him being very close to me, I'm thinking back over the past few years where he and I have been corresponding very, very satisfactorily. He wrote a lot of poetry at one stage, and wrote poetry right to the end, actually. A lot of it doggerel, fun, really entertaining, but some of it very, very good. And he called himself the Bard of Balgony, which brings our, to me, back to our period on the farm near Balgony. I think I spoke about that earlier. But the farm, Don was, I was 6 when we left, he was 9, so the farm meant a great deal to him. He went to school on the prairies. He had his own horse, and he felt so close to the farm, and remained to the end feeling like a prairie person.
You're on record now. You want to be on record?
Well, I want to be on. Yeah, oh, that's right. Sorry, I'm being a little dull about this.
Doesn't matter.
I started to talk about my brother Donald and my father, and Don seeing my father. And I did not see him until after my mother died. He was in Weyburn, Saskatchewan Mental Hospital for something like 25 years. But after Mother died, while she was alive, I did not feel I wanted to see him. So after she died, my husband told me very thoughtfully, took me west to see him, which was a fascinating experience. We had written to the powers that be in Weyburn to tell them we were coming. We arrived on a particular day and went in and asked for him, and they went and got him, and he came out looking so spruce, so handsome, so well cared for physically. And we took him out for lunch. He knew me. He knew I was married, and so he recognized Tommy as my husband. And the luncheon was quite fascinating. He was totally lucid. I would have said sane, but except obviously he was still had to be in an institution. But we talked about about politics, because he was a great liberal. And he expounded. He didn't just talk to us, he really expounded it. And we had a very pleasant time.
How old was he?
He then must have been... Our mother died when she was 70, and he was 10 years old. He was 80, and she died, so he would have been about 82.
And was he happy to see you?
Well, yes, he seemed pleased to see me. It was though I was a bit of a curiosity.
But it wasn't a big surprise to see you. It wasn't...
No, he didn't think I was an odd part of his life.
Or no, but it wasn't a long lost reunion.
Oh no, he kissed me in a perfectly, so he kissed me every day.
As though he'd seen you the day before.
Yeah. Oh, it was quite fascinating actually, and it wasn't a bit harrowing. I didn't find it disturbing. In fact, I felt relieved. It was great to go back that many years, and because I had some really good memories of him, as I said earlier. So, but that was came to mind to describe it because of Don. Because Don, I think, related to his father much more. Father was a horseman of some. Well, he commanded the 16th Light Horse Cavalry, so he was a horse, and the chip was very important to him. And we have pictures of him on the farm on horses. But I think that connection between Don and Father was quite close. Neither John nor I had that connection. Oh, there are pictures of us sitting on horses, but we didn't have our own horse, and we didn't really.
Don was the only one that was old enough, probably.
Yes, he was. Mother rode too, but they both rode on the farm.
Side saddle or a stride?
No, side saddle.
Always?
Yeah. We had her saddle, her side saddle, for years. I don't know what happened to it. We had various relics of Dad, like his Colt revolver, which was from the war. But it was...
from the First War?
Yes, definitely the First War. He was a lieutenant colonel and commanded a regiment, but cavalry in the First World War went out. My father never engaged in battle. He did, when he was something like 18 or 19, enlisted in the army and went to the Boer War.
Oh, he did?
But he was very young. Then it was after that he went to Osgoode Hall and graduated from Osgoode in 1900. That was before he went. After he graduated, he went west because that was the land of promise.
What year was he born?
He was born in 1879.
And when you say he went west, is this before he met your mother?
Yes.
To BC?
No, to Regina.
To Regina.
It was the land of promise.
Saskatchewan?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because of wheat.
The breadbasket?
Yes. And it remained the land of promise until
the dirty 30s.
Yeah, that was when the dust storms obliterated everything. Actually, my husband, funny, my father had bought 4,000 acres of prairie land near Balgony, which sounds enormously wealthy, doesn't it? It was completely destroyed in the dust storm.
It was, eh?
It was frost fenced all around, and there was no sign of the frost fence afterwards. It was that.
Gee, lovers.
Well, we'd done it. Human beings had ruined it. It's now come back considerably, of course, but that was...
Don't put your finger over the microphone unless you're planning on turning it off.
Well, I want to stop it for a minute.
Just giving Mom a little lesson in recording, but don't put your hand near the microphone. Look, you can just use this pause button. If you push pause, now the pause button is in the out position, and it will start recording again. So rather than using the stop, excuse me.
I've had the pause, the lesson, in using the pause button. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about mother and father and the West. My father went west after he got his law degree from Wascott Hall in 1900. He went west to Regina and was very successful as a lawyer. Made quite a lot of money until he began to become schizophrenic. But during that good period, he met my mother, who lived in Winnipeg, and they were two very handsome people. And I think they met at balls, probably military balls, and other balls of the period, and in Winnipeg. Then they got married in Winnipeg, and they went off on their honeymoon to on a Mediterranean cruise, actually. They probably sailed from, they did sail from New York, I know, because Mother used to talk about going to the Metropolitan Opera on their honeymoon. And they went to cross the Atlantic and through the Mediterranean, stopping in various places like Italy, perhaps Greece, perhaps Spain. Oh, and I know they got as far as Paris, because Mother brought their Aunt Elaine, her elder sister, was pregnant, and she brought a christening dress there for Aunt Elaine, which subsequently she copied for our children. Tim, all our children wore it when they were christened. And after our grandchildren were grown up, at least were no longer in the christening stage, the older grandchildren, Tim's children, then Peter's children came along, and I got the christening dress and its petticoat. I got it cleaned, washed and cleaned. I put it away very carefully, actually. I got it prepared for Ben for his christening, and he wore it, and Anna wore it for her christening. And now it's put away for great-grandchildren sometime. They bought that for Aunt Elaine, and they bought a banquet cloth for themselves, which we have used every Christmas of my life. Quite a beautiful cloth, tablecloth, linen, damask, and very beautifully embroidered. It's now beginning to fall apart, so we use it very seldom. Back to back to Regina, where Mother and Father lived. I suppose they lived there for something like 4 or 5 years. In the meantime, my father had bought the enormous tract of land with a farmhouse, and I guess he got increasingly schizophrenic and increasingly less supportive, so he moved his family down to the farm, where we lived for 6 years. No, we didn't. We lived for, I think, 3 years. And in the meantime, I believe he lived at the club, the Regina Men's Club. I don't know when he started writing, but I know that he was writing his life history when he went back to Regina from Belleville. In the meantime, I've told you about living in Belleville, and then we went to live in Toronto with Mother working as a secretary to the Minister of Health, and then being reduced from there to being a filing clerk. But she had no training, so though she was very good at managing people, she was very capable. She couldn't just move into a job because she wasn't equipped. But then they gave her a job in the mental hospital, Ontario Hospital, Kingston, where she was the house mother. In other words, she was in charge of the nurses' residence. Yes, Mother went to the Ontario Hospital, Kingston, but before she moved there, I'd gone in training to Montreal to the Royal Victoria Hospital, become a nurse, and which went very well. I went alone to Montreal. It was met by a friend of Mother's, Mrs. Mackenzie, who kept me overnight and then took me to the hospital the next day. And I settled into the hospital quite well. There were things about it I didn't like. I objected to the first thing we were taught was how to hold the door open for the doctor. And a lot of the doctors expected that, except one particular doctor, Dr. Archibald. He was the doctor, he was from Nova Scotia, and he was the first North American doctor to do a thoracoplasty. He was, by the time I met him, he was, probably 70, and a really charming man. Not the sort of man that you had to hold a door open for. This is 1937. Mother is in Kingston as house mother at the Ontario Hospital, and I'm in training in Montreal. During that period, when I was in Montreal, I spent my holidays with Mother in Kingston, and they were quite good. I didn't have any particular friends, but Mother and I were good friends. We got along well together. And I saw something of the nurses and the other people, occupational therapists, for instance, who worked at the KGH. And I had something to do with some of the interns. That's where I first met my husband, Thomas Evans Currier. He was in medical school at that time and had an internship at the KGH because he was very interested in psychiatry. I saw him and I saw some of the other doctors, and their names escaped me. But then back to the hospital, I had good friends there. Billy Bell, Folkier, Jean Booth, and some others that I didn't see so much of. I had the odd period when I went out with a young man, nobody that I was ever attached to. I never went out with an intern, which was a bit of a disappointment, because one would expect to when one was in training, but I didn't. I loved living in Montreal, saw quite a lot of it, made friends there. The Apedales were so good to me. Marnie was in training at the same time. It was a good time being in Montreal. I felt very fortunate. Unfortunately, I did not learn any French. The RVH is a strictly Anglo hospital, and we were discouraged from talking to the French Canadians. We had a number of French Canadian public ward patients, and they were charming and so grateful for anything you did for them. But as I say, if you were caught talking to one, the head nurse would find something else for you to do. At the end of my training, I graduated in January 1940. I went and took 3 months at the Communicable Disease Hospital. Queen Alexandra was called. It was right on the edge of the city dump. And when they burnt the garbage, the stench was unbelievable. But I did my 3 months there so that I then was equipped to go to the University of Toronto and take public health nursing, which I did starting in 1940, fall of 1940, a one-year diploma course, and I finished it in 1942, finished on June the 8th, 1942, and was married to Tom Currier on June the 21st, 1942. No, not June the 21st, 1941. We had been seeing an increasing amount of each other while I was doing my public health nursing, and Tommy was doing his general internship at the Kingston General Hospital. The reason we were married fairly quickly after we graduated was because it was wartime. Tommy had enlisted in the Air Force, and there didn't seem to be much time. Getting married and reproducing the species was paramount, which we did. Tim, our eldest son, who was actually Thomas Evans Jr., but we nicknamed him Tim because Tommy's mother, Katie, called him Tim. He was born in Ottawa, and we lived in various different places in Ottawa, but eventually we found an upper duplex on Sweetland Avenue, which was very comfortable, very comfortable. Tim was born there, Mother was there. Mother was still working at the Ontario Hospital in Kingston. Oh, no, she wasn't. Mother had left. Mother had left and had done various odd jobs during the war. She was a house mother at a munitions plant at Ajax, and she worked in another, there's a great farm fair where they were employing a lot of people. So food was so important. Mother was working there, and then off and on she lived with us after we were married, but mostly she did babysitting. She would sit for people for long periods. She was very well liked, very good with children. Anyway, there we were in Ottawa with Tim born. Jim and Gwen lived near us, just down the way from us. Brother John was in the Army. He was in Europe in the engineers. Brother Don was not in the Army. They wouldn't take him because he was physically not very robust, having had an enormous back operation at one stage. But there we were, and Tommy's mother and father lived in Ottawa, so we saw a lot of them. Katie and I became quite good friends. I wasn't Gwenny, Jim's wife, who was very close to Katie, but we got along quite well. But then Tommy went overseas in October of 1942. Tim was 5 months old. Katie and I went to the Union Station in Ottawa to see Tommy off, which was pretty harrowing. And then Mother and I moved to Kingston. Mother was still at the Ontario Hospital, Kingston, and we went down there and with Tim, but the Ontario Hospital said I couldn't stay there in the nurse's residence with Mother. There's no reason for it. So we then packed up from Kingston and least from the Ontario Hospital, and got an apartment in Kingston on Earl Street, which was very pleasant. I missed Tommy terribly, and I found it pretty awful, 2 women looking after one little baby. So I went to work actually with the VON for a period, though the doctor, I've forgotten his name, disapproved of working mothers, which is interesting, because that's 42 or 43, and now practically all mothers work. But anyway, the mother and I, after about a year, left Kingston and went to Toronto. I found Kingston very, very lonely. I didn't have any friends. I knew people, but they weren't friends. Kingston isn't very easy to break into. So we went to Toronto and got an apartment. Funny apartment. It was the top of a garage. We sublet it actually, right near Don and Kay, which was a great break for me. They did a lot with me during that period. Saw Paul Robeson in Othello, which was wonderful, and heard music and saw other plays with Kay and Don, which was a big help for me. Quite enlarging. Both Kay and Don were very forward-thinking people. The first time I ever met a black person was at their house. But they were people of enormous worth. It's 1944 now, and Tim and I were down in Presqu'île with Jean and Bob Nesbitt for a few days, and I got a cable from Tommy saying, "Get out my summer uniforms." And I knew by that he was coming home, because they did not take their summer uniforms to England. So I immediately got on the telephone. I've forgotten how I did it actually, but I got hold of Mother and Katie were at Stony Lake. I got hold of somebody, and I had the car, and I drove up to Stony Lake with Tim, and Uncle Frank was there, and Tommy was due, let's say, the next day, maybe 2 days afterwards, and Uncle Frank said, "Come into Peterborough with me and stay overnight at my house, then you can have the car to go and pick up Tommy." Uncle Frank was Tommy's mother's brother, and a bachelor, and a kind of irascible man, and this was quite an enormous concession, that he would take me and let me sleep overnight in his apartment, which he never had done before, as far as I know. He'd never married, though he's supposed to have had a very unhappy love affair. But anyway, I went and I slept and got up and drove down to the station, and the train stopped and out came Tommy, which was wonderful, wonderful thrill. And then we went driving. And stopped and had a little loving out along the river road. Got back to Uncle Frank's about 9. I guess the train got in about 7:30 or 8. We got back to Uncle Frank's at 9. He was quite angry with us because we were having breakfast at Marjorie Hatton's across the road, and he thought we would be there about 8 or so. However, he got over it, and we had our breakfast, and then we all took off and went up to the lake. And Tommy saw his 2-year-old son for the first time since he'd been 5 years old, which was a pretty happy occasion, though it wasn't that happy for Tim. I don't think children really accepted their fathers who had been overseas for a long time with any great warmth. They didn't know what they were or who they were. Continue this a little longer. I will continue until I get us out of Toronto and up to Peterborough. So there we were in 1944, Tommy with his disembarkation leave in Canada. Yeah, I think he had 2 weeks, most of which we probably spent at the lake, or also looking for an apartment in Toronto, which we found. We found a very nice upper duplex on Heath Street, just off Yonge Street. Very comfortable. We lived there for, I guess it was 2.5 years while Tommy was doing his postgraduate work at Christie Street Hospital. It was during that period when I was pregnant with, go back a little, Tommy did not stay in Toronto. He went to Dartmouth for a period in which he was supposed to be teaching aircrew about flying, some the sort of things they had to learn how to cope with when they were flying, physical things. And he was there for about 2 or 3 months and got very angry at one stage, and somebody said, you should perhaps apologize or do something. And then a doctor, somebody he'd known at Queen's, said, would you like a job with the doing psychiatry with the some of the damaged aircrew? And he said yes, indeed. So he was sent to Ancaster and was there for probably 6 months, I guess, until the end of the European War, the war in Europe in 1945. And he then after that, then he went and did his postgraduate work. He started out doing his postgraduate work in psychiatry, and he'd got the prize at Queen's when he graduated in psychiatry, so he was very interested. But then, as part of that, he had 6 months in internal medicine, and he decided that he would like that better. He could do psychiatry as well as internal medicine, so he changed to internal medicine and got his FRCP, Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in Canada. I guess it would be 48, because that's when we moved to Peterborough. Tommy got an appointment with Dr. Scott and Dr. Bell, and went and practiced with them. Now that's the end of this particular session. Ahead sometime. Today is March the 20th. We've had signs of spring, 2 or 3 very nice days. But last night we had a really severe snowstorm, and we're all covered with snow again. But I'm quite sure that it's going to improve. I want to go back about 3 months to January, when my older brother Donald Russell Carman, died in Toronto. We had known he was going to die for 6 months or so. He had cancer of the pancreas. When he discovered he had it, he telephoned me the same day to tell me. We had been corresponding quite pleasantly, quite vigorously for the last 2 or 3 years. So it was important that he did let me know. 10th of January, he went into hospital at the Etobicoke General Hospital, prepared to die. But after a short time, his daughter Suzanne and our daughter Lee got very disturbed about it and decided that he should go home to die. This was rather awkward because his wife Jean is in that hospital with great trouble with her emphysema, and she wasn't likely to get out. But despite that, Suzanne felt he should go home, so they took him home. Lee and Suzanne prepared the house for him, and on the 20th of January he was brought home, hospital bed in the living room looking out over the river. It was quite beautiful, and he was content to be there. Lee was there then, and I went down on the Monday the 22nd. Tommy and I both went down, and he was pleased to see us, recognized me, and as a matter of fact, when I left the room a short time later, he said to Lee, "Where's Sheila?" And Lee said, "Well, she's just down there." So I decided to stay. Tommy came back to Peterborough, but I stayed, and Suzanne was there. Suzanne and Lee and Christopher was in every day, and his darling wife. On the Tuesday, the 23rd, his friend Gordon Martin came from Montreal to be with Don, and he stayed over that night, Tuesday night. Both Monday night and Tuesday night, I went to bed about 11 o'clock with the word that they would call me if Don changed. However, he didn't change. On Wednesday, we were all there, the four of us, Gordon, Suzanne, Lee, and myself, and he'd been very restless. Then he'd gone to sleep, and somehow or other his breathing began to slow down, actually, and I thought he's dying. So Suzanne was down at the kitchen. We called her, and she came up, and she was there when he actually breathed his last. Very good death. He slept most of the time after he came back from the hospital. He would get restless. They'd have to sit up, and then we'd give him he wasn't eating anything. He wasn't really even drinking anything, but he would take a little sip of water, and then they would clean him up because he was incontinent at that stage. But there was a lot of laughter. There was an enormous amount of love. Nobody could have died in a more loving atmosphere. It was Wednesday, 24th, and on the 27th, he was interred in the Woodbridge Cemetery. It was a deplorable day. It was raining, cold, miserable, and there was just the immediate family there, and some of us spoke. Lee spoke. Lee, quote, said she said a poem of Yeats that Don was very fond of, and I read one of Don's pieces of poetry. Peter just spoke of what a great person he was. Suzanne spoke. Christopher spoke. It was all very moving and very, very right, just right for Don. He did not have any religious belief, and would not have relished anything in the way of a church service. So Tommy read part of the Anglican burial service. We all went back afterwards to Suzanne's, to Don's. Jean was not there. Jean was in the hospital and couldn't get out. Her daughter was there, Sassy, and her husband. Many other people. He was very much loved. Gordon Martin, who is just a super person, such a wonderful, loving person, and two of his sons and daughters-in-law were there. Don has been dead now for 2 months, and I miss him very much. As Lee said, "You're an orphan now, Mum." Mother and Father died many, many years ago, obviously. But Brother John died about 6 years ago, and now Brother Don has died. So I am an orphan. However, I've got a lovely family. I've got a husband who's so good to me, and great children. Lee's a joy. Tim and Peter, both a joy. When I think of Don, go back many, many years to the period when we lived on a farm, of which I've spoken earlier. But he was older than I was. Well, he's 3 years older than I am. But he was 6 to 9 when we lived on the farm, and he had his own horse, and he loved the farm. He loved the freedom of it. He rode to school on his own horse. When I think he always thought of himself as a prairie boy after that. And later on, when Dad was in mental hospital in Saskatchewan, he went to see him twice. And that was very important to him. And he wrote a lot of poetry latterly. And he called himself the Bard of Algony. Algony was the small town that was near the farm. No idea how much of what I'm saying now I'm repeating. So that perhaps I will now go back to our own family and tell you a little more about what has happened to us since 1948. We had 3 sons and a daughter. Tim, Peter, Michael, and daughter Lee. Michael was our 3rd son and was very difficult. He was what was called tentatively a psychopath. And when he was 18 years old, he was expelled from the family, which was pretty desperately sad. Over the years, he's now 49, and over the years he's done a variety of things. Been in and out of jail, nothing very serious, just stealing things. I don't know if he ever stole cars, but he definitely lifted things at home. Actually, he stole constantly at home. The children's piggy banks were never safe. He emptied them every time he put money in, practically. But when he was out in Toronto at one stage, I kept in touch with him. And he lived with a girl called Harriet. They weren't married, but they had 2 children, and I saw the children and saw Harriet, and I just kept in touch with him. But for the last 5 or 6 years, he's been in Ottawa, which, as far as I'm concerned, is great. I find it very difficult seeing him. When Tim's daughter, Alexander, was killed in an automobile accident when she was 12, which is must be about 10 years ago now. I got asked Barbara Currier, Jim's daughter, to bring Michael up when they came up to her Alex's funeral. But then he's been here the odd time since then, but he's still really not welcome in the family. It's still very difficult. Barbie Currier is good to him. She has him always for Boxing Day dinner, and periodically, and when he gets in trouble financially, which he does fairly frequently, she'll loan him money. After I think she has given him money, I'm sure, often. And upon occasion, when I know that he's in trouble financially, I've helped him. So has Tommy. Tommy has loaned him money a number of times. But desperately sad. Michael. It's now March the 27th, 1996, and I'm coming to the end of this tape. According to the gauge, there's only about 4 seconds left, or maybe it's 4 minutes, I don't know. Anyway, I'll sign off now and get back on another tape.